I remember exactly where I was sitting when Mrs. Henderson called. It was Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the annual science camp trip that my daughter Emma had been talking about since September. I was at my desk at the community center, where I work as a coordinator, sorting through donation receipts, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Lincoln Elementary, and my heart immediately started racing because schools only call in the middle of the day when something's wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Henderson's voice was crisp, professional, the kind of tone that tells you she's made this call before and doesn't particularly enjoy it. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm calling about Emma's participation in the upcoming science camp. I'm afraid we're going to have to remove her from the trip roster. The words hit me like a slap. Remove her? Emma had been counting down the days, had already packed her sleeping bag twice just to make sure everything fit in her backpack. I'm sorry, what? I managed to say, pushing back from my desk. There must be some mistake. Emma's permission slip was turned in weeks ago, and I paid the deposit. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. It's not about the paperwork, Ms. Rodriguez. It's about Emma's behavior in class. We feel it would be best if she stayed behind this year. Behavior. That word stuck in my throat like a stone. My Emma, who reads 3 books a week and asks questions about everything from why leaves change color to how satellites stay in space. My Emma, who spends her afternoons helping me organize supply closets at the community center because she says she likes making things neat and useful, that Emma had behavior problems. Let me take you back to the beginning to help you understand why that phone call felt like a punch to the gut. My name is Sophia Rodriguez, and I'm a single mother, raising my 8-year-old daughter Emma in a small town outside Phoenix called Millfield. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where your reputation follows you from elementary school to your grave, and where being different isn't just noticed, it's cataloged and discussed over coffee at the local diner. Emma came into this world during what I now call my surviving years. Her father, Marcus, was a charming guy who talked big about building a life together, but disappeared the moment things got real. He left when I was 7 months pregnant, taking his promises and half our savings account with him. I haven't heard from him since Emma was 2, and honestly, that's probably for the best. Raising Emma alone hasn't been easy, but it's been the most purposeful thing I've ever done. She's always been different, special in ways that some people celebrate and others find threatening. She thinks deeply about everything, asks questions that make adults uncomfortable, and has this incredible ability to see patterns and connections that most kids her age miss entirely. When Emma was 4, she taught herself to read by studying the ingredient labels on cereal boxes. By 5, she was checking out chapter books from the library and reading them cover to cover in single afternoons. By 6, she was correcting adults when they got their facts wrong about history or science, not in a smart alecky way, but with genuine excitement about sharing what she knew. Most of the time, I was proud of her curiosity and intelligence. But I started noticing how other people reacted to her. At playgroups, other mothers would smile tightly when Emma would explain why their toddlers shouldn't eat certain snacks because of the artificial additives. At family gatherings, my relatives would make jokes about Emma being too smart for her own good, or needing to learn when to keep her mouth shut. The problems at school started almost immediately when Emma entered kindergarten. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a sweet woman who'd been teaching for 30 years, but she clearly didn't know what to do with a 5-year-old who finished her worksheets in 10 minutes and then wanted to know why they were learning about community helpers, when they could be learning about how communities actually function economically. The first parent-teacher conference was eye-opening in all the wrong ways. Mrs. Patterson sat across from me in a tiny plastic chair. Emma's work samples spread between us like evidence in a trial. "Emma is certainly bright," she began, and I could hear the but coming from a mile away. But she has trouble following directions. She questions everything. She disrupts other students by correcting them or offering information they haven't asked for. I looked at Emma's work. Her math worksheets were perfect, but filled with additional problems she'd created for herself in the margins. Her reading. Comprehension sheets had not just the required answers, but detailed analyses of character motivations and plot predictions. Her science journals were filled with observations and questions that went far beyond the simple, "What did you see?" prompts. "She's engaged," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Isn't that what we want?" Mrs. Patterson smiled that tight smile I was becoming familiar with. "Engagement is wonderful, but it needs to be appropriate engagement. Emma needs to learn to wait her turn, to stick to the curriculum, to let other children have their chance, to shine." That phrase haunted me. Let other children have their chance to shine. As if Emma's light somehow dimmed everyone else's. As if intelligence was a finite resource that needed to be rationed fairly among 6-year-olds. The complaints continued through first grade. Emma would finish her reading assignments and then pull out her own books, which apparently was disruptive. She would ask follow-up questions during science lessons, which threw off the lesson plan. She would help struggling classmates with their math problems, which was seen as undermining the teacher's authority. Each parent-teacher conference felt like a trial where Emma's curiosity was being prosecuted as a crime. I started keeping a folder of her work at home, the real work, the projects she created on her own time. Stories about space explorers and time travelers. Detailed drawings of the solar system with explanatory notes about gravitational pull. Charts comparing different ecosystems and their interdependencies. At home, Emma was flourishing. At school, she was being systematically dimmed. Second grade brought Mrs. Chen, who I initially hoped would be different. She was younger, recently graduated, full of enthusiasm about innovative teaching methods. But within a month, the same complaints started rolling in. Emma wasn't fitting into the classroom dynamic. She was asking too many questions. She was making other students feel bad about their work by comparison. That's when the behavior reports started. Emma was disruptive when she would finish her work early and start reading her own books. She was defiant when she would politely point out factual errors in the textbooks. She was attention-seeking when she would raise her hand to ask questions that went beyond the basic lesson plan. I requested a meeting with the principal, Mr. Davidson, a man who'd been running Lincoln Elementary for 15 years and had the sort of authoritative presence that made you feel like you were back in elementary school yourself, waiting outside the office for doing something wrong. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, settling behind his large desk while I sat in the uncomfortable chair across from him, "I understand you're concerned about Emma's school experience." I had prepared for this meeting, had notes written on index cards, tucked into my purse, but sitting there under his stern gaze, I felt like I was the one being called to account. "I'm concerned that Emma's intelligence is being treated like a behavioral problem," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She's not acting out or being disrespectful. She's just engaged with learning in a way that seems to make everyone uncomfortable." Mr. Davidson leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Emma is certainly a bright child, but intelligence without appropriate social skills can be disruptive to the learning environment. She needs to learn that school is about more than just academics. It's about cooperation, following directions, and respecting authority." There it was again. The suggestion that Emma's natural curiosity and enthusiasm for learning was somehow selfish or antisocial. That her desire to understand things deeply was a character flaw that needed to be corrected. "What if we looked into accelerated programs?" I suggested. "Maybe she needs more challenging material." Mr. Davidson shook his head before I'd even finished speaking. "Our policy is to keep children with their age-appropriate peers. Emma needs to learn to adapt to the classroom environment, not the other way around." I left that meeting feeling defeated and angry. Emma wasn't the problem. The system was the problem. But the system was also the only option we had. Third grade was when things got really bad. Emma's teacher, Mr. Walsh, was old school in the worst possible way. He believed in silence, conformity, and the kind of rigid classroom management that treated children like small soldiers who needed to be drilled into submission. Emma tried to adapt. I watched her try to make herself smaller, quieter, less curious. She started coming home frustrated and sad. Her natural enthusiasm was being slowly suffocated by constant corrections and reprimands. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The breaking point came during a science unit about weather patterns. Emma had been fascinated by meteorology since she was 6, had read every book the library had on the subject, and could explain the formation of different cloud types better than most adults. During the lesson, Mr. Walsh was explaining how tornadoes form, but he got several key facts wrong. Emma raised her hand politely and said, "Actually, Mr. Walsh, tornadoes form when warm, moist air collides with cool, dry air, creating rotation in the atmosphere, not because of temperature differences alone." She wasn't being disrespectful. She was sharing information she was excited about. Mr. Walsh's face turned red. "Emma, we don't interrupt the teacher to show off what we think we know. Please keep your comments to yourself unless you're asked to share." That afternoon, I got a call about Emma's inappropriate behavior in class. When I asked Emma about it later, she just shrugged and said, "I forgot I'm not supposed to know things." That sentence broke my heart. My curious, brilliant, enthusiastic little girl was learning that knowledge was something to be ashamed of, that being smart was a social liability, that fitting in was more important than growing intellectually. By the time Emma reached 4th grade, she had learned to hide her intelligence like it was something embarrassing. She would deliberately get some answers wrong on tests so she wouldn't stand out. She stopped asking questions in class. She started pretending she didn't know things that she clearly understood. I watched my daughter dimming herself to fit into a system that couldn't handle her brightness, and it made me furious. But I also felt helpless. What were my options? Private school wasn't financially feasible. Homeschooling would mean giving up my job, which would mean losing our apartment. Moving to a different district wasn't realistic with my limited income and need to stay close to my support network. So I did what I could. I supplemented Emma's education at home. We visited museums on weekends. We checked out advanced books from the library. We watched documentaries and had long conversations about everything from ancient civilizations to quantum physics. At home, Emma could be herself. At school, she had learned to be invisible. The science camp trip was announced at the beginning of Emma's 4th grade year. It was a 3-day program at a nature center 2 hours away, focused on hands-on learning about ecosystems, astronomy, and environmental science. Emma lit up when she brought the permission slip home. This was everything she loved wrapped into one experience. "Mom, they're going to have real telescopes," she told me, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "And we get to study water samples from the lake and identify microorganisms. And there's a night hike where we learn about nocturnal animals and their adaptations." I hadn't seen Emma this excited about school in months. The permission slip cost $50, which was a stretch for our budget, but seeing Emma's enthusiasm made it worth every penny. I filled out the forms, paid the deposit, and watched Emma start planning what she would pack, what questions she would ask, what she hoped to learn. For weeks leading up to the trip, Emma was like her old self again. She checked out books about forest ecosystems and nocturnal wildlife. She practiced using the star chart she'd gotten from the library. She made lists of animals she hoped to see and questions she wanted to ask the naturalists. Her teacher, Mrs. Foster, seemed different from the others. She was younger, more energetic, and had mentioned in her welcome letter that she believed in hands-on learning and encouraging student curiosity. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful that Emma might have found a teacher who would appreciate her enthusiasm rather than stifle it. That hope made Mrs. Henderson's phone call even more devastating. "What specific behavior are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Has Emma been disrespectful? Has she been disruptive? Because that doesn't sound like her. At all." Mrs. Henderson paused, and I could hear more papers shuffling. "Emma has a tendency to dominate class discussions. She asks too many questions during lessons, which prevents other students from participating. She corrects other students when they give incorrect answers, which can be embarrassing for them. And she often goes beyond the scope of assignments, which sets unrealistic expectations for her peers." Every word felt like a slap. Emma's curiosity was being framed as selfishness. Her knowledge was being treated as showing off. Her enthusiasm for learning was being characterized as disruptive behavior. "So you're punishing her for being engaged with her education?" I asked, not bothering to hide my anger anymore. "You're excluding her from an educational opportunity because she's too interested in learning?" "Ms. Rodriguez, I understand this is disappointing, but we have to consider the group dynamic. Science camp is about teamwork and cooperation. Given Emma's tendency to dominate situations, we feel it would be better for everyone if she remained at school that week." I hung up the phone and sat staring at my computer screen, feeling like the world had tilted sideways. How was I supposed to go home and tell Emma that she couldn't go to science camp because she was too smart, too curious, too excited about learning? That evening, I sat Emma down in our living room. She was at the kitchen table working on a project about renewable energy sources that wasn't due for another 2 weeks, because that's the kind of kid she was. She looked up at me with those bright, intelligent eyes, and I felt my heart break a little bit more. "Emma, honey, I need to talk to you about something," I said, trying to figure out how to explain institutional discrimination to an 8-year-old. "Mrs. Henderson called today about the science camp trip." Emma's face immediately lit up. "Did they tell you what time we're supposed to be there? I've been thinking about what questions I want to ask about the nocturnal ecosystem, and I made a list of—" "Emma," I interrupted gently, "you're not going to be able to go on the trip." The light in her eyes died so quickly it was like watching a candle get snuffed out. "What do you mean? Did something happen? Did we not pay enough money?" "No, baby, it's not about money." I took a deep breath. "The school decided that you shouldn't go because they think you ask too many questions in class." Emma stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. Then she said in a voice so small it barely qualified as a whisper, "So I'm being punished for wanting to learn?" I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried, quiet tears that somehow hurt more than if she'd screamed and raged. Because Emma was learning the lesson that I'd been dreading she'd learn, that being smart, curious, and enthusiastic about knowledge could be used against you. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision. I wasn't going to let this stand. Emma deserved better than a system that treated her intelligence like a behavioral problem. She deserved teachers who celebrated her curiosity instead of stifling it. She deserved to go to science camp with her classmates, to ask all the questions she wanted, to learn and grow and shine as brightly as she was capable of shining. I didn't know how I was going to fight this, but I knew I was going to fight. Because if I didn't stand up for Emma, who would? If I didn't advocate for my brilliant, curious, amazing daughter, who was going to do it? What I didn't know then was that Emma had been keeping secrets of her own. While I thought I was protecting her by staying quiet about how special she was, she had been quietly building something that would change everything. Something that would make even Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Davidson see her in a completely different light. But that revelation was still to come. For now, all I knew was that my daughter had been banned from a science camp for being too interested in science, and I wasn't going to let that stand. Not for Emma, and not for any other kid who'd been told they were too much, too smart, too curious for their own good. The fight was just beginning. The next morning, I marched into Lincoln Elementary with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I requested an immediate meeting with Principal Davidson, and this time I wasn't going to be dismissed or talked down. 2. I had spent the entire night researching educational policies and Emma's rights as a student. Mr. Davidson looked surprised to see me back so soon, but he agreed to meet. I sat across from his desk, but this time I felt different, stronger, more prepared. "I want to discuss Emma's academic record," I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. "Before you make any final decisions about her participation in science. Camp? I think you should see what she's actually accomplished." He looked skeptical but gestured for me to continue. I opened the folder and spread Emma's work across his desk. Not the simplified classroom assignments, but the real projects she'd been working on independently. "This is Emma's analysis of water quality in our local creek system," I said, pointing to a detailed report complete with charts and graphs. "She collected samples over 6 months and documented seasonal changes. And this," I continued, pulling out another paper, "is her research on renewable energy implementation in rural communities. She presented this to the County Environmental Board last month." Mr. Davidson's expression began to change as he looked through Emma's work. His eyebrows rose higher with each page he turned. "She also won first place in the Regional Young Scientists competition," I added, placing the certificate on his desk. "Her project on urban wildlife adaptation was selected from over 200 entries. The judges said it was graduate-level research." "I wasn't aware of any of this," Mr. Davidson said quietly, still studying Emma's work. "That's because Emma has learned to hide her abilities at school," I replied. "She's been taught that being curious and knowledgeable is disruptive behavior, so she dumbs herself down to fit in." I pulled out my phone and showed him the email I'd received just that morning. "This is from Dr. Sarah Chen at Arizona State University. She's offering Emma a spot in their summer program for gifted young scientists. Emma is 8 years old, Mr. Davidson. She's not disruptive. She's exceptional." The principal sat back in his chair, looking genuinely stunned. He picked up the university letter and read it twice. "There's more," I continued, feeling momentum building. "Emma has been corresponding with researchers at NASA about her questions on planetary atmospheres. She's been published in the Junior Science Journal. And last week, she received an invitation to participate in a national symposium on environmental science." I watched as Mr. Davidson's face went through a series of changes: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like embarrassment. "Ms. Rodriguez, I had no idea Emma was involved in any of these activities," he said finally. "Her teachers never mentioned—" "Her teachers see a little girl who asks too many questions," I interrupted. "They don't see a young scientist who's already contributing to her field. They don't see a child who spends her free time conducting research because she genuinely loves learning." Mr. Davidson was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's work. Then he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. It wasn't the dismissive authority figure anymore. It was a man who was realizing he'd made a serious mistake. "I need to speak with Mrs. Foster," he said, "and I owe you and Emma an apology." An hour later, I was called back to the school. This time, Mrs. Foster was there too, along with Mrs. Henderson. The atmosphere in the room was completely different. "Ms. Rodriguez," Mr. Davidson began, "after reviewing Emma's academic achievements and speaking with her teacher, we've realized we made an error in judgment. Emma's enthusiasm for learning isn't a behavioral problem. It's exactly the kind of scientific curiosity we should be encouraging." Mrs. Foster nodded. "I've been going through Emma's classroom participation with fresh eyes. What I initially saw as dominating discussions, I now realize is genuine excitement about sharing knowledge. She's not trying to show off. She's trying to contribute. We'd like Emma to not only attend science camp, Mr. Davidson continued, but we'd like her to serve as a junior research assistant. The naturalists there have expressed interest in meeting her after I shared some of her work. I felt tears starting to form. This was what I'd hoped for Emma all along. Recognition, not punishment, for her gifts. There's something else, Mrs. Foster added. We'd like to nominate Emma for the state's Young Scholar program. It would allow her to pursue advanced coursework while still staying with her age group for social activities. When I picked Emma up from school that day, she looked confused by my huge smile. "Mom, why do you look so happy?" she asked, as we walked to the car. "Because, baby girl, you're going to science camp after all. And more than that, they want you to help lead some of the research activities." Emma stopped walking and stared at me. Really? But I thought I asked too many questions. It turns out, I said, kneeling down to her level, that asking questions is exactly what good scientists do. And you, Emma Rodriguez, are an exceptional scientist. For the first time in months, I saw Emma's face light up with pure, uninhibited joy. Science camp was everything Emma had dreamed it would be and more. She came home each day buzzing with excitement about the experiments they'd conducted, the wildlife they'd observed, the questions they'd explored. But more importantly, she came home confident again. The naturalists at the camp were so impressed with Emma's knowledge and curiosity that they invited her to return as a junior counselor the following summer. They also connected her with other young scientists in the area, creating a community where her intelligence was celebrated rather than hidden. Mrs. Foster transformed Emma's classroom experience. Instead of trying to contain Emma's curiosity, she found ways to channel it. Emma became the class's research specialist, helping design experiments and leading study groups. Her classmates stopped seeing her knowledge as intimidating and started appreciating her as a resource. The ripple effects continued throughout the school. Other teachers began recognizing gifted students who had been hiding their abilities. The administration implemented new policies to better support academically advanced children. Emma's story became a catalyst for change. 6 months later, Emma received her acceptance letter to the State Young Scholar program. She also got word that her environmental research would be presented at a national conference. But the moment that meant the most to me was smaller, quieter. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was picking Emma up from school. As we walked toward the car, I heard her classmate Jake call out, "Emma, wait up. I need help with my science project. You always have the best ideas." Emma turned to me with a grin. "Is it okay if Jake comes over to work on experiments?" Course, I said, watching my daughter embrace her role as a young scientist and friend. That evening, as Emma and Jake worked on their project at our kitchen table, discussing hypotheses and variables with the same excitement other kids reserved for video games, I realized something important. Emma hadn't changed. She was still the same curious, intelligent, passionate learner she'd always been. What changed was how the world chose to see her. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to fight for what's right. One parent refusing to accept that their child should be diminished to fit in. One folder of evidence showing that what looks like a problem might actually be a gift. Emma is now thriving in an environment that celebrates her curiosity instead of stifling it. She's still asking questions, still learning voraciously, still thinking deeply about the world around her. The difference is that now she's surrounded by people who see those qualities as strengths, not flaws. Every child deserves to shine at their full brightness. Sometimes we just have to be willing to fight for the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.